Book of Joshua tonight. And we're going to be right across the page in Deuteronomy 34 to show you the circumstances of Joshua taking over. Now remember, somebody else had to disappear from the scene in order for Joshua to take over. Look at Deuteronomy 34 right across and go to, let's start in verse 5. Deuteronomy 34, verse 5. Notice it says, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." All right? Nobody saw him die. Nobody was there when he died. He died all alone, except he was with the Lord. All right? And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab over against Beth Peor. But I want you to see who buried him. Who buried him? God did. And there's a special reason for that. Anybody know why? Because if Moses' body had been found, what would they do? Boy, that'd be a big shrine and they'd be bowing down for Moses and all that nonsense. That's not what God wanted. I know that's not what Moses wanted. So God buried him where he couldn't be found. No doubt, I'm sure the devil would want to dig him up so the Jews would go back and worship him again. But God's not going to let that happen. But now notice here, this heavy loss unto Israel. Moses is dead now. Okay? Now he'd been with them a long time, hadn't he? Think about it. He'd been with them all this time. He'd been with them all the way out in the wilderness. And they all died out in the wilderness, remember, except for Joshua and Caleb. In that generation. So now Moses has died. Look at verse 8. "And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab." How long? Now that's a long time to have a funeral service, ain't it? Here we're lucky to have one day now, or a half a day. Now they're up to 30 days here with Moses. So you can tell that they were drastically affected by the death of Moses. Okay? It was painful to them. And you stop and think about it. Here's the man of God that had been with them from the beginning. He's the one that helped them, that delivered the messages to Pharaoh. He's the one that led them out of the cruel, oppressive bondage that they were in. He's the one that was their commander-in-chief, so to speak. He's the one that took them up to the Red Sea, remember? And what happened there? He prayed and God parted the waters and led them across on dry ground, where Pharaoh's army then, boom. So Moses was right there as the head man. Now, remember that the whole while that on the trip to the promised land, what was Israel doing with Moses? What'd they do? They always complained. They always murmured. They always were backbiting. They always had Moses for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay? Chewing him up, tearing him down, saying, "Oh, that no-count rascal," and tried several times to replace him. That wasn't God's plan, was it? But Moses was faithful right up until the end. He lost his ability to go into the promised land because of anger at Israel for what they were doing in that circumstance of murmuring against God. And instead of speaking to the rock, he struck the rock and out come the water. So God said, "That's it, Moses, you're not going in." But he did let Moses see the promised land before he died. So here they are now, 30 days. That's a long time of mourning. And notice how it says, it said, Israel wept for Moses 30 days, so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Okay? Weeping and mourning. So it affected them physically, spiritually, it affected them deeply. Now, you stop and think about the man of God now is gone. What are they going to do? Think about it naturally. What would you do? You've got a preacher. What if I go on? What if I pass on to glory? What you going to do? You're going to have to look for another one, ain't you? Well, Israel's going to have to look for another one, but guess what? God's got that took care of. God's got it took care of. Look what it says there in the next verse, 9. It says, And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the children of Israel did what? Hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. Now I want you to see the brag here on Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land. And all that mighty hand, and in all that great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel. So Moses was indeed a mighty man of God. And it's hard to fill those shoes. You stop and think about trying to fill the shoes of Moses. All right? So now we find here that Joshua is going to receive the call. Verse 1 of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 1. All right? Because the man of God dies doesn't mean God's promises stop. Doesn't mean that he's not going to fulfill his promise. Doesn't mean that he's not going to take care of things. He's still going to do it. The death of Moses did not stop God from completing his promise to Abraham and to Abraham's children. Remember, God promised Abraham that they would take possession of the promised land. And that's not going to be stopped just because Moses died. Remember, God told Moses to lay hands on Joshua, and Moses did. And he did that in front of the people. So they knew that God was starting Joshua out as a leader and that he would be taking over soon. But there's a 30-day period. Now, Joshua wasn't jumping at the bit saying, okay, I'm in charge now. No, he waited until God told him to take charge. Look at verse 1. Now, after the death of Moses, I want you to see that first. After the death of Moses. Okay? He's died, and they're mourning. The mourning period is over. Now here comes God speaking to Joshua. It said, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord did what? Spake unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister. Okay, he reminds you who Joshua is. He reminds you his relationship to Moses. He reminds you that Joshua had been prepared to take over this role as the leader of Israel. All right? He reminds you of that by that little statement in there. He shows you that this was God's plan. This is God speaking now to Joshua. Just as he spoke to Moses, so he's going to speak to Joshua. So there's a change of the guard here. Different man, but he'd learned under the ministry of Moses, and that's a wise thing for preachers and young preachers to learn under the aged preacher's ministry so that they can know how to handle these situations that come up. And there are some situations that do come up. Now here's God. He talks to Joshua. Moses is gone, he's buried, Aaron's dead too. It's just Joshua and the other, Caleb, and the high priest now. They're going to have to take care of business. Hear what God says. Moses, my servant, underline that, is what? Now Moses just didn't disappear in the wilderness. He didn't go on a sabbatical and let Joshua take over. He's dead. God wants it verified that Moses is dead. They didn't get to see Moses die, but here's God saying he's dead. So what's that mean? He's dead. Okay? He's dead. So there's no question about this new change that's going to take place once God finishes this commission that he's fixing to do, this appointment. There's no question that this has happened. Moses is in fact dead. Now here, Joshua, I'm talking to you. There's a reason for it. Look what he says. Verse 2 says, it said, now therefore, arise. Now remember, they're back to the Jordan River, and they've stopped. They've been camped out. They were in the plains of Moab before. Now they've come up to the Jordan River, and there they're sitting, waiting. Okay? Moses has died, and they're sitting there. They've mourned for Moses in the plains. Now they're sitting here at the river, and God hasn't told anybody anything. Now he comes to Joshua and says, Moses is dead. Now, therefore, arise. So what's God saying? Get up. Time to go. Get up. Arise means to take action, to get up off of your seat, get off of your comfortable position, and go. All right? Arise and go over this Jordan. Now, I want you to see this. The call wasn't just unto Joshua, but look at the rest of the verse here. It says, and to who else? All this people. So God is calling not just Joshua, he's calling Joshua and everybody else too. Okay? He's calling them to do something, and he's ordering them to take up the walk and get across the Jordan. Now you think about it, when they crossed Jordan, it was in its springtime runoff, and it was full. And it was just like when they got to the Red Sea, there wasn't much hope of crossing without some help, was there? So looking at the circumstances, Joshua will be looking at Jordan River flowing over its banks and stuff, and said, man, how are we going to get across that? So God's got a plan, though. But before Joshua gets to that point and actually goes, he's got to be encouraged by God. So he says, I want you to get up and go into the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Now I want you to see that. There's the deed, another deed, a copy of the deed. God says, I gave this land to who? To who? To Israel. Okay? Not to the Palestinians, not to the Arabs, not to the Jordanians, not to the Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, or anybody else. He gave them that land to Israel. Now, if God gives the deed, who can supersede that deed? Nobody. He made that land, didn't he? He made all of this earth, and he has a right to say, this piece of land is going to this country, this nation, my people. He promised Abraham, and he is fulfilling that promise to Abraham that his people out of his children would take possession of that land. And here it is that he gave them. You see that phrase? God gave them that land. So he's not just ordaining Joshua to take over command. He's also ordaining the people, said, finally, get your hind ends back in that place. And don't do like you did last time. Now think about it. What happened the last time they came up to Jordan? They got scared, didn't they? Remember the 10 spies and the 2 spies. The 10 spies gave a bad report, saying there's giants in the land. Ain't no way we can win. But the 2, Joshua and Caleb, they gave a good report. Said, man, look at this grapes that like basketballs. Look at this land that flows with milk and honey. Man, let's go in. Let's take it. God said we could. We're going to do it. But who did Israel decide to follow after? The 10 negatives. And decided that they couldn't go in, and they boo-hooed and cried and all that, carried on. And finally Moses said, you ain't going in. Oh, wait a minute, we changed our minds. So they tried to go in and they got whooped. So God sent them out into the wilderness for how long? 40 more years. 40 more years. So now they're back again, kind of deja vu, isn't it? Here we are at the banks of Jordan. Look out. Let's make sure we go in this time. Let's don't get some doubt because there's giants over yonder. Let's get some gumption about us. Let's get up. Let's get ready and let's go on this pilgrimage across the Jordan and into the promised land. And look at verse 3. It says, every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, look what it says, that have I what? I have given unto you. In other words, it's going to be yours. Now, yeah, you're going to have to work for it. Yeah, you're going to have to run out the inhabitants. Yeah, you're going to have to take possession. You're going to have to start over. But look what you're taking over. Remember what happened when they went in and began to take over cities? What did they find in the cities? Everything. The larders were full. Anybody know what a larder is? It's not the tub that you keep your lard in. It's their version of a refrigerator or a pantry. Okay? It's where you kept your food. And their food was stocked up. It was full. All they had to do was go in and it was theirs. Once they defeated the enemy, then they could take possession. Remember, Joshua would divide it up among them. We'll see that later. Joshua would divide the lot up between the tribes, and then they would take possession after they defeated those enemies. So here we see now, God is choosing Joshua as Moses' replacement. Wasn't Joshua standing up and say, ooh, me? We'll see where Joshua's not doing that at all. Okay? Joshua was told by Moses that he was going to be his replacement. Moses laid hands on Joshua and prepared him for that. And now here's the time for Joshua to take over the reins. All right? And you think about it, if I were Joshua, I'd be nervous as a cat on a roof. Boy, think about it. Here now, for 40 plus years, he'd seen how they were, right? He'd seen how they acted. He'd seen what they did, how they said, how they murmured, how they complained, how they backpit, and all that. And this is the children of them. So what's that tell you? Well, it's going to be just as bad. So he's going to have to get encouraged and strengthened in his heart and his soul to take over the reins. And God's got a way of doing that. He knows how to encourage his people. So here now is the commission which Joshua's received from the Lord. It was given to him as the head of Israel. He's now the head of Israel. All right? Now there are some things in this chapter that we look at that God's going to challenge him to do, but the phrase that you'll see repeated over and over in different verses, it says, only be thou strong and very courageous. He's going to need strength and he's going to need courage. Now you think about it. Remember how Israel acted when they come up on Goliath? How'd they act? What was Goliath doing there when David was but a lad? What was he doing to the army of Israel? He was defying them, wasn't he? He was challenging them. Say, hey, we'll fight man on man. Whoever wins the battle, etc., etc. Well, nobody wanted to fight him. They all sat there. Every day he'd come out and challenge, and nobody'd come down and fight. Till one day a little shepherd boy came down. You see, the shepherd boy had the courage, didn't he? And God's encouraging Joshua to do the same thing. Have this courage. Be strong in your heart. Be strong in your mind. And be strong in your faith. Obey me, and guess what? You'll win, because I'm with you. And we'll see that in these next verses. So study ahead. Finish reading these verses of his commission, and then we'll take up with that next time, Lord willing. All right? We'll stop there. Let's all stand.